Well, here we are, yet again, met to worship together. And this worship, in our tradition and in so many religious traditions, is grounded in, and indeed, only made possible by words, by language, by words, words, words. Socrates said, "Children amuse themselves with toys, adults amuse themselves with words." What he meant was that words are all very well, but the problem is that rather than revealing the truth, they distract us from the actual, deeper truth. For Socrates, words were not the point. So is our particular way of worshiping, which is meant to be a deepening of our experience, which happens chiefly in words, just a way of amusing ourselves? But it is hard to imagine worship happening without words, isn't it? I do know of some U.S. and Canadian congregations who rely more on music and dance, yes, interpretive dance, as a way of expression and understanding in worship. A one, a two, a 1, 2, 3. So I want to consider today what sort of a thing we're now engaged in. Particular use of words in our worship is called preaching. I am therefore a preacher, and boy, am I uncomfortable with the connotations of that title. The connotation for most people is so relentlessly negative. To preach to someone, to be preached to, suggests some moral authority, which skeptical Unitarians might rightly question. For there is a power structure inherent in the practice of preaching. And that power seems to be up here. If you doubt this, look around. Look around at the physical context, the very architecture and spatial relations set up by the meeting house. What can this relationship embody but I speak, you listen? I worry about this because from my work as a media studies lecturer, I know that the medium is the message. That is, our choice of medium shapes the meaning of the message. So the medium of preaching is worth our attention today, I think. This space is set up for Papa or Mama to preach, for the words to flow from me to you. We don't question this, but maybe we should. Unitarians tend to shy away from the use of the word sermon, with all its ecclesiastical, holier-than-thou, moralizing connotations. We have instead the term address. Now, I do rather like this word better than sermon. I address you has less of a power relationship implied and a touch more respect for and equality with the congregation. However, whatever word we use to describe this particular worship practice of preaching, giving an address, is for better or worse lumbered with connotations of ascribed power and class, reminiscent of the old priest class who shepherded over the lives of the flock. Unitarians are a more skeptical, democratic, individualistic bunch, rejecting traditional authority and encouraging everyone to seek truth in their own way. Not so much a flock of sheep, more a herd of cats, and I say this with love, being a cat lover. So here's my question. What might address be in our more egalitarian, democratic, Unitarian context? Well, many things, but first let's start with what it's not. Unitarian address, this address might seem to resemble a lecture, but it's not. You don't come here for instruction, do you? If you do, God help you. First, Unitarianism has no orthodoxies which require highly developed theological or scriptural knowledge on the part of the preacher, like the sermon in the Christian Mass, whose job is essentially to say, well, what I think Jesus meant to say was. I've never been that confident. I don't parse Scripture, though, I could if you like. Our ethos is individual, many roads leading to Rome, and organized around certain principles, but not defined by them. Second, how would we vet someone as sufficiently wise to instruct those less well-studied how to live, love, and worship? I have a master's degree in philosophy, but that doesn't give me any special moral authority. All it means is that I've read lots of books of a certain type, written lots of papers of a certain type, had lots of conversations with learned teachers, all of it in words, words, words. So I, for one, can't regard you as unenlightened or a flock to be led. I think of myself as an equal speaking to equals, just another cat in the herd, meowing. Nevertheless, we have a minister or preacher who writes the worship and talks to us, and thus organizes our thoughts along particular lines, sets the boundaries of discourse about what can be thought about or felt, and thus broadly frames the experience we all have. Now that is power, and we should be rightly careful with it. A Unitarian address might seem to be reminiscent of soapbox oratory, which, thanks to Barack Obama, has made something of a comeback in recent years. But an address certainly isn't that either. Why? Well, for one thing, the congregation is not the public in the general sense of rabble-rousing oratory. You are a self-selected demographic of like-minded people. The lowest common denominator need not be appealed to ensure the widest possible appeal. You're already in the tent, brothers. You need not be converted. On the contrary, the congregation comes ready to give its attention as part of an unspoken contract. Your attention need not be stolen from you by tub-thumping oratory. I mean, oratory might give you a cheap thrill, but there are lots of better cheap thrills out there. Nevertheless, I'm sure you'd agree that some oratorical skill is useful for an address. Otherwise, people might lose interest, even those who come prepared to give their attention. If that happens, if people lose interest, what becomes of a service whose climax has traditionally been the address? We may feel we came for nothing. And though oratorical skill is useful, it's more to do with the how of preaching rather than the nature of preaching itself. And if we're focused on the how, if we're focused on style rather than the content, we are in the realm, my friends, of performance. And though an address may seem like a performance or to contain some degree of performativity, it surely can't be a performance. True, like a theater audience, the congregation comes trusting its time and trouble will not be wasted, just as a theater audience comes ready to suspend their disbelief, trusting its time and money will not be wasted. So the situation we find ourselves in is ripe for performance. But performance, and believe me, I know, is ego-driven, tends toward self-absorption, and I'm sure you'd agree that an address shouldn't be all about me, all about the person who has been, through various secretive rites of passage, bequeathed this pulpit and thus your attention for some time. Certainly an address may entertain, may divert our attention and make us feel better, but it certainly shouldn't be merely amusement. For this type of entertainment, you would do better to go to see some stand-up comics. My theory is that most stand-up comedians actually secretly want to be preachers. I mean, think of the physical setup. Think of the focus they get. Think of the power of the words and the delivery. If you don't think this is true, please go see some in the Fringe. Now, one who is preaching doesn't want to bore the congregation, but you don't want to merely amuse them either. No. We come to church. We come to this church for something more than amusement. We come to worship.